Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives. Jobs, incomes, debts, our own, those for our kids. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I hope that has prepared me well to offer these economic updates to all of you. Before jumping into today's updates, one announcement. On the second Wednesday of every month, year-round, I offer a public lecture in New York City to any of you, and indeed to the general public who might be in New York City on that occasion. The next one is on Wednesday, December 13th. What I do in those meetings, and they all take place at the Judson Memorial Church on Washington Square, a very historic part of Lower Manhattan. The exact address, 239 Thompson Street, 7:30, Wednesday, December 13th. There I have a chance to meet you. I have a chance to go into the kinds of things we do on the radio, but with greater detail. It's a chance for people interested in the greater New York area, but also for people who might be visiting New York City to get together in the same sort of way that we do on this program. So if you're around December 13th, join us at the Judson Memorial Church, Washington Square, 7:30. The big news, of course, is the tax bill that was passed by the Senate a while ago, that is being processed as we speak, and being made into law because the Republican Party that has supported it and the president who has supported it are in charge of both houses of Congress, etc. I won't bore you, because I'm sure many of you are well aware, with all the problems of that tax bill, many of which are going to play out over the months and years ahead. But I wanted to go after one because it's already in evidence. Perhaps the single most important feature of the bill was reducing the corporate tax rate in the United States, the percentage of the profits a company makes that it must pay to Uncle Sam in taxes. In the initial phase of the bill, from 35% to 20%. That may still change. There are last-minute adjustments that could change it, but not by much. A colossal cut, almost 50%, if it stays at the 20% new level. And the idea is simple, as the president and others have said. If the United States lowers the tax rate on corporations, the idea goes, American companies will have less reason to leave the United States to go to countries where tax rates are lower. And by the same logic, companies now located in other countries where tax rates are lower will now have a reason to come back to the United States because we've lowered them here. The flaw in this argument, which is not complex to understand, the flaw in this argument is to not understand that other countries can do exactly what the United States is doing. So, for example, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, within one day of the United States Senate's going along with cutting the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%, within one day, the Prime Minister of Israel announces they're going to cut their tax rate on businesses too. And when asked why, his answer was as obvious as what I'm telling you now. We don't want Israeli companies to leave Israel to go to America. We want the opposite. So if Americans lower the tax rate, we'll lower it too. You know what this is called in economics? It's called the race to the bottom. Each country competes with every other country by trying to attract and hold businesses by offering the lowest possible tax rate. So country 1 lowers it, so does country 2, which leads country 3 to do it, which pressures country 4 to follow suit, and then country 1 goes even further, and pretty soon the corporations are laughing all the way to their banks. as the countries compete with one another to charge less and less from the people who have the most, the big companies. And of course, as each country is forced by this competition to lower its tax rate, it has less money with which to provide public services to its people. You can see where this goes. And here again, notice the problem isn't this or that corporation or this or that politician. This is a system that works this way. The race to the bottom, crippling government's ability to provide public services, is part of what we are living through and will continue to live through unless and until the criticism of a system that isn't working for most of us becomes a movement to go beyond, to do better than a system that works this way. The tax bill has other features that do require even a brief comment. I have worked in universities all my life, and so I've been surrounded by graduate students. Those are people who've completed 4 years of college, gotten their bachelor's degree, but now want to go on, get a master's degree, a doctoral degree, and so on, in order to qualify, to build up their credentials, to get a better job, pure and simple. It's very expensive to go to school, has been. It's become more expensive in the last 20 years. Many students already have debts just to get a bachelor's degree, and if they go on to graduate school, well, then they have to borrow some more. Any little bit helps because their families are squeezed by the economic difficulties of capitalism for most people over the last 25 years. It's hard. One of the few benefits that the tax law gives to graduate students as they become more credentialed, more qualified, more skilled, more trained, has been to give universities the incentive and the wherewithal to give students waivers on their tuition payments. In other words, if you want to get your education, go beyond a bachelor's degree, we here at whatever the university is will say, okay, we'll give you that training, make you a more productive contributor to the society, and we won't charge you the tuition we would otherwise have required. At least if you're skilled, if you've passed some exams, if you are eligible. What the new tax law does is slap you in the face. The new tax law, as proposed by the House of Representatives and supported by the Republican leadership and the president, would require a graduate student who is relieved of paying tuition so that he or she can get their additional skills and training to declare on their income tax the dollar value of the tuition waiver and then pay Uncle Sam a tax on the money they didn't have to pay as if it were income. In other words, graduate students are going to discover they have a new expense to get a graduate education. The same tax bill that lowers taxes on corporations that are rich and lowers taxes on rich people has found a way to balance the books by slapping graduate students in the face with a new tax. For them, it's a tax increase in order to pay for the tax decrease for corporations. Scratch your head a bit. It's the least you can do as you think about what that means. And so let me give you another statistic about American college students as you think about it. The United States is not in the top 10 countries in the percentage of people 25 to 34 who have some kind of advanced degree. We're not in the top 10. We once were, but we aren't anymore. And why is anyone surprised? And if you think we're not in the top 10 before this new tax increase on graduate students goes into effect, imagine where we will be when it does. The next update This has to do with an ongoing project I have on this program, which is to give you some of the evidence that we are not living in a recovery of the economy. Or to be more accurate, there isn't a recovery for the top 10%, the richest people in this country, who need it least. And there isn't a recovery for the other 80 to 90%, the people who need it most. And if it strikes you as bizarre to have an economy that gives a recovery to those who need it least and deprives those who need it most of one, well, then you are becoming a critic of the system. So here's the evidence for this week about there being no recovery for most people. Over the years between 2006 and 2016, the decade marked by the great collapse of 2007 and 8 and everything that's happened since, we have 8 million more households in America just by the growth of population. Keep that number in mind. We have 8 million more households. How many homeowners do we have? 400,000 fewer. Let me do that again. Between 2006 and 2016, 8 million more households, but 400,000, roughly 500,000, fewer homeowners. You know why? Because people can't afford to own their own home the way they once could. The proportion of home ownership has dropped from 69% of households to 63%. Now, that seems small to you, 6 percentage points. Let me translate it into the following. 9 million families have lost their homes through foreclosure or short sale, which is the same, between 2006 and just 2014. If we extended it through 2017, it would be beyond 9 million. 9 million people thrown out of their home over the last decade. Maybe even 10 million. For those of you who've never had this experience, let me assure you, it is a trauma. It's a trauma for the parents. It's a trauma for the children. It is a blow to your financial well-being from which many people cannot recover. They can't recover the money lost in the house where they made payments for years, but then they lost the house and with it, all the payments. It's a trauma psychologically for parents who promised the American dream to their children, promised it to one another, weren't able to do it. That's not a recovery, ladies and gentlemen. That's a disaster. And the disaster continues. We have fewer homeowners in a country that has 8 million more households. That means we're not even keeping up with what we've had. It's a sign of an economy not experiencing recovery. Before I go on with these economic updates, a reminder. We maintain 2 websites that are designed to serve your interests and needs. These websites allow you to communicate with us what you like and don't like about the program. These websites allow you to follow us with a click of the mouse on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. These websites are ways that we have to supplement what we do on this program. And the whole point is to partner with you, to give you ways of spreading the word, sharing what you learn, what you hear on this program with other people, friends, family, co-workers, neighbors. Make use of this material. That's why we gather it, process it, and present it. And for those of you that are listening to this program, but you might want to see it as a television program, let me remind you that you can easily do that by going to patreon.com, Patreon, patreon.com/economic update, and follow the television version of this program in that way. Returning to our updates, I wanted to make you aware of something called the Valve Corporation, V-A-L-V-E, the Valve Corporation. It is a major player in producing video games, computer games, here in the United States, where it has been really successful and built quite a reputation as an innovator, as a place where creative individuals with new and different ideas can create games to entrance and educate millions of people around the world. Why am I bringing it to your attention? Because it teaches a lesson about the difference between organizing an enterprise in a hierarchical capitalist way, you know, with shareholders, a bunch of them who own the bulk of the shares, who choose the board of directors, usually 15 or 20 people, who make all the decisions, what's going to be done, how it's going to be done, where it's going to be done, and what's done with the profits. All of that, tiny group of people at the top making the decisions for all the employees, who can number in the hundreds, the thousands, the tens of thousands. Valve Corporation doesn't believe in that. Very successful corporation. Here's what they say, and you can go to their website if you're interested and find out, valvesoftware.com. They organize in a different way. They don't want capitalist hierarchy. And what really caught my attention was their statement. A hierarchy is good if you want control, to repeat the same thing over and over again, to predict exactly what's going to happen. That's why armies are organized that way. That's what they say at Valve. How do they organize everything? We want to get the maximum creativity of our workers. Hierarchy is no good for that. So we set up our business horizontally. They even call it flatland at the Valve Corporation. Every worker has her own desk. Every desk is on wheels. Every worker works in and how and with whom he or she wants to, on a project he or she designs for themselves or together with other workers. They move from one project to another. This has been incredibly successful for them. In other words, the capitalist hierarchical way of organizing an enterprise, in their view, stifles creativity and productivity. Innovation requires the freedom of an equal, cooperative, fluid arrangement, giving workers much more power, individually and in groups, over what they do, how they do it, where they do it, with whom they do it. And then, of course, they can participate in deciding what is done with the fruits of their labor. Some of you have worried that a worker co-op is somehow not going to be good for innovation. Valve Corporation believes it's exactly the other way around, and they've organized themselves with great success by giving workers freedom to cooperate with one another without the hierarchy of conventional capitalist enterprises. The next update is a little bit political, but it sheds light on an economic reality. Every year, the Nobel Prize Committee awards something called the Nobel Peace Prize. It's not a prize for physics or chemistry or biology, the way they give most of their prizes. It's a prize for a person or an institution that, in their view, those are the people in Norway who give the award, advance the cause of peace. And this year, this autumn of 2017, the Nobel Peace Prize was given to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Not a well-known organization, but one that has been working for a long time and has been campaigning for the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted by 122 nations in July of this year. And they're working hard on spreading it. When they announced that they were going to have the usual ceremony in Norway to award the prize, which they do with all the prizes that they award each year, a remarkable thing happened. The embassies of 3 countries that are owners of nuclear weapons said they wouldn't send the ambassador, which is normally what you send. Britain, France, and the United States will not send an ambassador to the celebration, a sign that they are not happy and disapprove of giving the Nobel Peace Prize to the Committee to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. 2 other nuclear powers, Russia and China, made a different decision. The Russians announced they will send their ambassador. The Chinese haven't made their announcement yet, but are expected to send their ambassador. What's going on? Well, what's going on is about economics, not about nuclear weapons. Something has happened to change the world in the last 25 years. In case you haven't noticed, let me drive the point home. The center of economic growth, the center of economic exploding productivity, has moved eastward. It's not located in Britain or France or the United States. More and more it's located in China, in India, in Brazil, and a whole lot of other places that we used to think of as the quote-unquote underdeveloped part of the world. Developed and underdeveloped are changing places. It's what happens in human history. It always has. Those who have been the least come to the front of the line, and vice versa. The problem with the decline of the economic well-being in Britain, France, and the United States, that decline means that folks living in that country, and particularly political leaders, find their economic power shrinking, which makes them fixated even more on whatever powers they have that aren't shrinking. And one of those is nuclear weapons. What you see, if the decision of the United States, France, and Britain holds, is a disinclination to give up the nuclear weapons, which is a dominant, powerful position, held on to all the more because the economic foundation of these societies is slipping, is changing, is eroding. And I would be irresponsible if I didn't tell you that one of the lessons of history is you enter a dangerous period when economic decline goes together with holding on to your military prowess. That's not a happy prospect, and it's one we need to be very careful about, and it's highlighted by this story about this year's Nobel Peace Prize. The last update we will have time for is about someone you know, the Starbucks Corporation. Why am I talking to you about Starbucks? It's not about the coffee. It's about the economics of Starbucks. Back in 2013, a stock tracking firm, Motley Fool by name, tried to explain why it had decided to say that Starbucks is one of America's best companies to work for. In those years, Starbucks had a great reputation. It treated its workers well. The reason we knew that was it said so all the time, over and over again, and it liked to tell the story of their former chief executive, a man named Howard Schultz, who attributed to his father's shaky job. The father never knew when he would be paid or not paid, troubles when he got hurt on the job. And the story was told, I believe in Fortune magazine and elsewhere, that Mr. Schultz was determined to never reproduce for his employees what his father had suffered on the job. Nice story. I wish it were true. But it isn't, and that needs to be understood. And I'll tell you why when I finish telling you the facts. The problem at Starbucks is part-time labor. You only get many of the benefits that Starbucks talks about if you work 20 hours or more. But getting to work 20 hours or more is not easy. Turns out Starbucks needs a lot of workers at certain hours of the day and not many workers at other hours of the day. So they insist on having schedules that are weird and changing from day to day, week to week, and plugging their workers in when it's convenient and profitable for them to be there. And that means many workers don't get the number of hours a week they need to qualify for the benefits that they like to talk about. 2/3 of the company's payroll is part-time workers. And according to a PBS Frontline report, if you want to work 32 hours a week, for example, to secure your access to health care, you have to make yourself available for 70% of the hours that the store is open, allowing them to plug you in how, where, and when they want you to. Now put that together with the average pay for a Starbucks barista. Ready? $9.50 an hour, including tips. Well, folks, if you work in the places where Starbucks are concentrated, New York, Washington, Seattle, places like that, you can't live very well, if at all, on $9.50 an hour with tips when you're working 20 or 30 hours a week. But the problem is, if you don't know from week to week when your hours are, it's even harder. You can't have a second job because you can't fix your schedule. It puts you in an impossible situation. And why do I tell you this? To show you that Starbucks had a reputation it didn't deserve? No, you probably guessed that. I don't want to criticize Mr. Schultz or anybody else at Starbucks. Starbucks is doing what the system has it do. You want to make money, you're a profit-making corporation, you have shareholders to please, bankers to pay interest to, you do what's profitable. That's what you're there for. That's why you went to business school. That's why your job as executive exists. If you don't want the outcome of Starbucks, the reality that's so different from the reputation, it's the system you got to deal with, not the particulars of this or that practitioner. We've come to the end of the first half of Economic Update. Thank you very much for staying with us. Please stay with us for a short interlude when we come back with the second half.